The dog hadn't let a human touch him in 742 days. The first scream echoed through the shelter just after midnight. Metal rattled hard enough to shake the concrete walls. Somewhere near the back kennels, a German shepherd slammed against a steel gate with a force that made the night attendant spill his coffee across the desk. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, cold and pale, while rain tapped softly against the windows of the old County Rescue Center outside Flagstaff, Arizona. "Shadow! Easy!" someone shouted. But the dog did not stop. Low growls rolled through the corridor like distant thunder. Deep, warning sounds, the kind that made people instinctively step backward. Two volunteers stood frozen near the hallway entrance, watching the retired police K9 pace inside the reinforced kennel. Shadow was 9 years old now, though nothing about him looked old except the silver beginning to spread around his muzzle. His body was still lean and powerful beneath the sable coat. Amber eyes burned beneath the dim lights, sharp and restless, scanning every movement around him. A faded K9 unit tattoo marked the inside of one ear. "He was fine 10 minutes ago," the attendant whispered. "Now it's like he senses something." The shelter director rubbed a tired hand across his face. "That dog's been through too much." Shadow lunged again at the kennel door. Not wild, not mindless. Intentional, as if he was trying to stop someone from coming closer. Outside, thunder rolled over the mountains. The scent of wet asphalt drifted through the cracked front entrance every time the wind pushed against it. Then the bell above the shelter door chimed softly. The dog stopped instantly. Silence swallowed the hallway so fast it felt unnatural. One volunteer blinked. "What the hell?" Slow footsteps entered the building. Tap. Pause. Tap. A white cane touched the floor carefully as a tall man stepped inside from the rain. His dark military jacket carried the faint scent of old smoke and cedar. Water dripped from the brim of his black cap onto the worn concrete beneath his boots. Elias Grayson stood still for a moment, listening to the room instead of looking at it. 38 years old. Former Marine reconnaissance sergeant. Blind for nearly 6 years after an explosion outside Kandahar stole the last thing he ever expected to lose: his sight. The shelter director cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Grayson? Thank you for coming this late." Elias nodded once. His face was rugged, tired around the edges, with the stillness of someone who had spent too long carrying invisible things alone. A silver pair of dog tags rested against his chest beneath the jacket. "You said the dog was aggressive," Elias said quietly. Before anyone could answer, Shadow stepped forward inside the kennel. No growling, no barking. The German shepherd's ears twitched toward the sound of Elias's voice. Slowly, the dog approached the steel gate until his nose touched the bars. The volunteers stared in disbelief. Shadow lowered his head. Then, for the first time in 2 years, the retired police dog sat calmly in front of another human being. Elias tilted his head slightly, hearing the faint sound of breathing on the other side of the corridor. "There you are," he whispered softly. And somewhere deep in the shelter, hidden beneath the storm and silence, something broken recognized something else that was broken too. The rain had weakened to a soft drizzle by the time Elias left the shelter. Somewhere above the mountains, thunder still rolled low and distant, fading deeper into the Arizona night. The old pickup truck smelled faintly of dust, worn leather, and cedarwood. Elias sat quietly behind the wheel with both hands resting near the ignition, listening. Beside him in the back seat, Shadow had not moved once. No growling, no pacing, just silence. The shelter director stood outside under the yellow parking lot light, arms crossed tightly against the cold. "You are really taking him?" he asked carefully. Elias gave a small nod. "Yeah, Mr. Grayson. This dog put 2 handlers in the hospital." Elias adjusted the sleeve of his jacket slowly. "People said the same thing about me after Afghanistan." The director opened his mouth as if to argue, then stopped. Because there was something strange happening inside that truck. Something nobody at the shelter had ever seen before. Shadow was calm, not sedated, not afraid. Calm in the way old storms sometimes became calm right before sunrise. Elias turned the key. The engine rumbled weakly to life. As the truck pulled onto the empty highway, rainwater hissed beneath the tires. Miles of dark pine forest stretched beyond the road, while the scent of wet earth drifted through the cracked window. Elias kept one hand lightly on the steering wheel, while the other rested near the old marine, cane folded beside him. Blindness had changed the way he experienced the world. Most people notice things with their eyes. Elias noticed breathing, footsteps, the tremble in a voice when somebody lied, the way silence changed when fear entered a room. And right now, he could hear the steady rhythm of the dog breathing behind him. Slow, controlled, watching. "You do not trust people much either, huh?" he murmured quietly. Shadow shifted slightly at the sound of his voice. Elias smiled faintly for the first time in days. The apartment building sat near the edge of town where the streetlights grew thin and the nights felt heavier. It was an old brick complex built sometime in the 1970s, with creaking pipes and hallways that always smelled faintly of detergent and stale coffee. Elias parked slowly beneath a flickering light and stepped out into the cold night air. The moment he opened the back door, Shadow jumped down silently onto the pavement. No leash pulling, no aggression. The dog immediately circled once around Elias, alert ears twitching toward every distant sound. "Easy," Elias whispered. "It is just us." Together they moved toward the stairwell. Tap, pause, tap. The white cane touched each concrete step while Shadow walked close beside him, close enough for Elias to feel the warmth of the dog against his leg. On the third floor, apartment 306 waited in silence. Elias unlocked the door slowly and stepped inside. The apartment smelled exactly the way grief smelled after years untouched. Dust, old books, coffee grounds, faint traces of cedar cologne hanging in forgotten jackets near the closet. Shadow stopped just inside the doorway. Elias heard him sniff once. Then again. Slow. Focused. "Home," Elias said softly, though the words sounded unfamiliar leaving his mouth. He reached toward the wall and flicked on the lamp near the couch. Warm amber light spilled across the small apartment. Framed photographs sat untouched along the shelves. Military medals remained boxed near the fireplace. And on the far side of the room rested a piano covered by a white sheet that nobody had touched in nearly 4 years. Shadow walked carefully through the apartment as if studying it. His nails clicked softly against the hardwood floor. Then suddenly he stopped near the hallway. Completely still. Elias heard it instantly. The silence had changed. Shadow let out a low sound deep in his throat. Not anger. Warning. The dog stared into the darkness near the back bedroom while every muscle in his body tightened. Elias slowly lowered his keys onto the kitchen counter. Shadow. The German shepherd did not move. Outside, wind rattled the old windows. Somewhere in the building, pipes groaned softly behind the walls. Then came another sound, barely audible. A tiny metallic click from somewhere deep inside the apartment. Elias froze, because Shadow was no longer looking at the hallway. He was looking directly at the bedroom closet door that Elias had not opened since the night his wife died. The apartment grew so quiet Elias could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator from across the kitchen. Shadow remained frozen near the hallway, ears forward, chest rising slowly as he stared toward the closed bedroom closet. Elias felt the air shift around him the way soldiers learn to feel storms before they arrive. Something was wrong. He reached carefully toward the counter and set down his keys beside the sink. "Shadow," he whispered again. The German shepherd answered with a soft rumble deep in his throat. Not fear. Alertness. The kind that came before danger revealed itself. Elias took a slow breath and tilted his head slightly, listening. At first, there was nothing except the old building settling around them. Pipes ticking behind walls. Wind brushing rain against the windows. Then it came again. A faint metallic sound from inside the bedroom. Click. Soft. Precise. Like someone touching metal against wood. Elias felt his pulse tighten. Nobody had entered that room in years. After Claire died, he had closed the closet door and never opened it again. Her coats were still inside. Her winter scarves. Her perfume probably still lingering somewhere in the dark. He could not bring himself to touch any of it. "Maybe a pipe," he muttered, though he knew the sound was wrong. Shadow suddenly moved. Slow steps across the hardwood floor. One paw at a time. Silent except for the soft clicking of nails against wood. Elias followed the sound instinctively, cane folded tightly in his hand now instead of extended. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and old cedar. Memories lived in that hallway. Christmas mornings. Laughter. Claire singing softly while making coffee before sunrise. All of it buried beneath years of silence. Shadow stopped directly in front of the bedroom door. Elias could hear the dog breathing harder now through his nose, sniffing, studying something invisible. Then Shadow pressed his head lightly against Elias's leg. A warning. Elias swallowed hard and reached toward the doorknob. His fingers trembled before touching the cold brass. "Okay," he whispered under his breath. "Easy." Slowly, he pushed the door open. The bedroom smelled untouched. Old linen, dust, faint traces of lavender trapped inside fabric that had not moved in years. Elias stood motionless at the entrance while Shadow entered first. The dog moved carefully around the room, nose low near the floorboards. Then suddenly Shadow stopped near the closet. A sharp inhale. One paw lifted slightly. The old marine instincts inside Elias woke immediately. He had heard that sound before overseas from military dogs seconds before hidden explosives were found. Not panic. Detection. Shadow stepped closer to the closet door. The low growl returned. Elias felt coldness spread slowly through his chest. "There is nobody here," he whispered, almost trying to convince himself. The dog disagreed. Shadow raised one paw and scratched once against the closet door. Tap. Then again. Tap. Tap. Elias stood frozen, because from somewhere inside the closet came another sound. Not loud, barely more than a whisper, but unmistakable. A slow creak from inside the darkness, as though something had shifted slightly behind the door. Elias took one careful step backward. His breathing became shallow. Shadow positioned himself immediately between Elias and the closet without command. Protective. Focused. The apartment lights flickered once overhead, then twice. And in the silence that followed, Elias heard something else. Breathing. Very soft. Not the dog's. Not his own. Coming from inside the closet Claire had not opened since the week before she died. The sound disappeared as suddenly as it came. Elias stood motionless in the bedroom doorway, one hand gripping the folded cane so tightly his knuckles ached beneath the skin. Shadow remained planted in front of the closet, shoulders tense, amber eyes fixed on the narrow strip of darkness beneath the door. Rain brushed softly against the windows behind them, while somewhere down the street a siren echoed faintly through the night. But inside apartment 306, the silence felt alive. Elias swallowed hard. "Who is there?" His voice came out lower than intended. No answer followed. Only the old apartment breathing around them. Pipes ticking. Floorboards settling. The scent of lavender and cedar lingering faintly in the stale air. Then Shadow stepped forward again. Slow. Careful. The German shepherd lowered his nose to the bottom corner of the closet door and inhaled deeply. Once. Twice. Elias heard the faint scrape of claws against hardwood. Searching. Detecting. Every instinct inside him screamed that something was wrong, yet another part of him felt something else beneath the fear. Familiarity. Like the room itself was trying to wake up after years of sleep. Elias took a careful breath and reached toward the closet handle. The brass felt ice-cold beneath his fingertips. "Easy, boy," he whispered, though he was not sure if he meant the dog or himself. Slowly, he pulled the door open. A soft creak slipped through the darkness. The closet smelled untouched. Old wool coats. Dust. Faint traces of Claire's perfume still clinging to scarves hanging exactly where she left them years ago. Elias felt his chest tighten painfully. He had not stepped this close since the funeral. Shadow entered first. Silent. His broad body moved carefully between hanging jackets and old storage boxes stacked against the wall. Elias stayed near the doorway, listening closely to every movement the dog made. Sniffing. Slow footsteps. Then sudden stillness. Shadow stopped near the back wall of the closet. A low rumble vibrated deep in his chest again. Elias frowned. "What is it?" The dog pawed once against the floorboards beneath an old wooden shelf. Tap. Then again. Elias slowly crouched near the sound, his knees aching against the hardwood. Dust filled the air as he reached forward carefully with both hands. His fingertips brushed across old boxes, folded blankets, and finally something metal hidden beneath the shelf. He paused. Cold steel. Small. Rectangular. Shadow breathed heavily beside him now, nudging Elias's arm gently with his nose as if urging him forward. Elias pulled the object closer. The metal scraped softly against the floorboards. A lockbox. He froze immediately. No, his voice barely escaped above a whisper. He recognized it by touch alone. Claire's lockbox. The one she used years ago for personal letters, and old keepsakes. Elias had searched for it after her death and never found it. He slowly rested the box in his lap, while Shadow sat beside him without making a sound. The room suddenly felt smaller somehow. Heavier. Elias ran trembling fingers along the surface until he found the latch. Unlocked. His breath caught in his throat. Slowly, he opened it. Inside rested a cassette tape, an old photograph, and a silver police badge he had never touched before. Elias picked up the badge first. The edges felt worn smooth with age. Beneath his fingertips, he traced engraved lettering. Detective Daniel Vance. Phoenix Police Department. Elias frowned deeply. He did not know anyone by that name. Why would Claire hide this? Shadow suddenly stood again. Fast this time. The dog turned sharply toward the apartment hallway outside the bedroom. Ears high, body rigid. Then came the sound. Footsteps. Slow, careful footsteps somewhere beyond the apartment door. Elias felt the blood drain from his face. The hallway outside apartment 306 should have been empty at this hour. But someone was there, standing just outside the door, listening. The footsteps stopped outside the apartment door. Elias remained crouched on the bedroom floor with the lockbox resting in his lap, while Shadow stood rigid beside him, ears raised toward the hallway. Neither of them moved. The silence pressing through the apartment felt heavier now, tighter somehow, like the walls themselves were listening. Then came a faint sound beneath the front door. A soft scrape against the floor. Paper sliding slowly across hardwood. Elias felt his pulse quicken instantly. Shadow released a low growl deep in his chest and took one careful step toward the bedroom entrance. Stay, Elias whispered automatically. The dog stopped immediately but remained tense, watching the hallway. Elias slowly stood, keeping one hand against the wall for balance while gripping the lockbox tightly beneath his arm. Every sound inside the apartment sharpened around him. The ticking kitchen clock, the hum of the refrigerator, rain dripping steadily outside onto the fire escape. And beneath all of it, the quiet feeling that somebody had been standing outside listening to them breathe. He moved carefully into the hallway while Shadow walked inches ahead of him like a shadow guiding another shadow through darkness. At the front door, Elias stopped. His breathing had become shallow now. He could smell cold rain drifting beneath the crack under the doorway. Nobody spoke outside. No footsteps remained. Just silence. Slowly, Elias crouched and reached toward the floor until his fingertips brushed paper. An envelope. Thin. Damp from rain. No stamp. No address. Just one word written across the front in black marker. Claire. Elias froze completely. Shadow immediately pressed close against him, warm and solid beside his leg. Elias carefully opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a single folded page. He unfolded it slowly while the old apartment creaked softly around them. The paper smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and rainwater. Then he heard it. Another sound from the far end of the hallway outside the apartment. Elevator doors opening, followed by footsteps leaving quickly this time. Whoever had been there was gone. Elias swallowed hard and focused on the letter in his hands. Though blind, he recognized the texture immediately. Raised ink. Someone had written in thick marker so he could read it by touch. Claire used to do that sometimes after he lost his sight. Large block letters. Easy to trace with his fingers. His chest tightened painfully. Slowly, Elias moved his fingertips across the message. Do not trust the badge. Elias stopped breathing for a moment. The room seemed to tilt beneath him. Shadow let out another low rumble and moved toward the apartment windows, pacing once across the living room before returning to Elias again. Restless now. Alert. What is happening? Elias whispered into the silence. He turned slowly toward the couch and sat heavily beside the old lamp. The cassette tape rested beside the police badge on the coffee table now, while rainwater streaked softly against the windows behind him. Shadow sat directly at Elias's feet, watching the apartment door without blinking. Elias reached carefully toward the cassette tape. Dust coated the plastic edges. Old. Forgotten. Somewhere in a kitchen drawer, there was still a cassette player Claire refused to throw away even after everything became digital. If this is some kind of joke, his voice faded weakly. Deep down, he already knew it was not. Nothing about tonight felt accidental. Not the dog. Not the hidden lockbox. Not the letter slipped beneath the door minutes after they found it. Shadow suddenly lifted his head sharply toward the living room window. Ears forward again. Elias heard it a second later. A vehicle engine idling slowly outside the apartment building. Too late for neighbors. Too quiet for traffic. The engine remained there for several seconds before finally pulling away into the rain. Shadow did not relax. Neither did Elias. Because somewhere beneath the fear, another realization was beginning to settle into his chest like cold stone. Claire had hidden that box for a reason. And somehow, after all these years, Shadow had led him directly to it on the very first night. The storm finally began to drift east sometime after 2 in the morning, leaving the city wrapped in that strange silence that only comes after heavy rain. Elias sat motionless on the couch with the cassette tape turning slowly between his fingers while Shadow remained awake near the apartment door. The German Shepherd had not rested once since entering the apartment. Every few minutes his ears twitched toward sounds Elias could barely hear. Pipes shifting in distant walls. Elevator cables humming faintly through the building. The creak of footsteps from apartments floors below. Always listening. Always watching. Elias leaned his head back against the couch cushion and exhaled slowly. You already knew something was wrong, did you not? Shadow glanced toward him at the sound of his voice, then returned his attention toward the hallway outside. The lamp beside the couch cast soft amber light across the apartment while shadows stretched long against the walls. Elias could still smell Claire's lavender perfume lingering faintly from the open bedroom closet. For years he had avoided touching anything she left behind because grief felt easier when locked away. But tonight the past had opened its own door. Slowly, Elias reached toward the side table near the couch until his fingers brushed old plastic. The cassette player. Dust coated the surface thick enough to tell him nobody had touched it in years. He swallowed hard and opened the compartment carefully. The small machine clicked softly beneath his fingertips. Shadow suddenly stood, instantly alert again. Elias paused. What is it? The dog paced once toward the kitchen window before returning to the couch. Restless. Uneasy. Elias listened carefully, but heard nothing unusual outside now except distant water dripping from gutters. Easy boy. Still, Shadow refused to settle. Elias inserted the cassette tape slowly into the player. The old machine whirred weakly to life. Static crackled through the apartment first. Then silence. Elias gripped the edge of the couch tightly. A soft breath echoed through the tape. Then Claire's voice filled the room for the first time in 4 years. Elias, if you are hearing this, then something has gone very wrong. His entire body went still. Even Shadow stopped moving. Claire's voice sounded older somehow through the static. Fragile, tired, but unmistakably hers. Elias felt his throat tighten instantly. I did not know who else to trust anymore. The recording continued softly. If anything happens to me, you need to stay away from Daniel Vance. Promise me. Elias lowered his head slowly into his hands. The police badge sitting on the coffee table suddenly felt heavier than stone. Claire, he whispered brokenly. On the tape, a faint sound interrupted her voice for a moment. A door closing somewhere in the background. Then hurried breathing. There are people looking for something, she continued. I think Daniel was trying to protect me at first, but now, I do not know anymore. Shadow suddenly released a deep growl toward the apartment entrance. Loud this time. Elias jerked upright immediately. The dog stood stiff near the door, every muscle tight beneath his sable coat. Then came the sound. 3 slow knocks against the apartment door. Knock, knock, knock. Not loud. Calm. Deliberate. Elias felt coldness spread through his chest. Nobody should have known he was here tonight except the shelter staff. Shadow barked sharply once and positioned himself directly between Elias and the door. The cassette player crackled softly beside them, while Claire's unfinished message hissed through static in the background. Another knock came, slower this time, followed by silence. Then a man's voice through the door. Low, calm. Mr. Grayson, I know you found the tape. Elias stopped breathing, because somehow the stranger outside sounded less like a threat and more like someone terrified of what would happen if Elias kept listening. Shadow barked again, louder this time, the sound shaking through the small apartment like a warning siren buried deep in old memory. Elias immediately reached down and gripped the dog's collar gently. The thick fur beneath his fingers trembled with tension. Outside the door, the stranger remained silent for several seconds while rainwater dripped softly somewhere down the hallway. Then the man spoke again. Please, he said quietly. You need to turn off the tape. Elias felt every instinct inside him tighten. The voice sounded strained, exhausted, not angry, the kind of voice carried by people who had not slept well in years. Shadow did not trust it. The German shepherd stood firm between Elias and the apartment entrance, lips pulled back slightly as another low growl rolled through his chest. Elias swallowed hard. "Who are you?" Silence followed. Then came the sound of a hand resting softly against the doorframe outside. "My name is Samuel Vance," the man answered finally. "Daniel Vance was my brother." Elias froze completely. The apartment suddenly felt colder around him. On the coffee table beside the couch, the silver police badge seemed to weigh down the entire room. Samuel continued speaking before Elias could respond. "Claire contacted my brother 3 days before she died." Elias tightened his grip on Shadow's collar. "Why are you here?" "Because if you keep listening to that tape, other people will come." The words settled into the apartment like smoke. Shadow barked sharply once more, refusing to calm down. Elias could hear movement outside now, not footsteps leaving. The man remained standing there, waiting. Elias turned slightly toward the cassette player still humming softly beside the couch. Static crackled faintly through the speakers while Claire's unfinished recording waited inside the machine like a ghost trapped between years. Finally, Elias spoke again, voice low and controlled the way Marines spoke when fear needed somewhere to hide. "If you know something about Claire, then start talking." Samuel exhaled heavily through the door. Daniel worked internal investigations for Phoenix police. Corruption cases, missing evidence, drug money disappearing from seizures. Elias listened without moving. "Claire found something by accident," Samuel continued. "She was not supposed to know about it." Shadow's ears twitched sharply toward the hallway again. Elias noticed immediately. The dog was not focused on Samuel anymore. He was listening for something farther away down the corridor. Another presence. Another sound. Elias felt his chest tighten. "You are not alone out there, are you?" Silence. Then Samuel answered softly. "No." At the far end of the hallway outside came the faint ding of the elevator doors opening. Shadow exploded into barking instantly. Furious now. Protective. Elias heard hurried footsteps somewhere beyond Samuel's position, followed by hushed voices he could not fully make out. Samuel cursed quietly beneath his breath. "Mr. Grayson, you need to leave. Right now." Elias stood quickly, pulse hammering hard enough he could hear it in his ears. "Who are they?" "People who think Claire hid something before she died." Shadow paced violently near the door now, claws scraping hardwood while the hallway outside grew louder. More footsteps. Slow. Approaching. Elias felt the apartment shrinking around him. Years ago in Afghanistan, moments before roadside explosions, everything used to become strangely quiet inside his mind. That same silence returned now. Cold. Focused. Survival. Samuel spoke rapidly through the door. "There is a fire stairwell at the end of the kitchen hall. You can still get out before they reach this floor." Elias turned instinctively toward the kitchen. Shadow immediately moved beside him as if already understanding. The dog pressed against Elias's leg firmly, guiding him away from the front entrance. Another voice echoed faintly outside now. Deeper. Calm. Apartment 306. Elias felt dread settle into his stomach. They knew exactly where he was. The cassette player suddenly crackled loudly behind him. Then Claire's voice returned through the static unexpectedly. "Elias, if Shadow finds this tape before they do, trust the dog." Every sound inside the apartment disappeared beneath those final words. Elias stopped breathing. Slowly, he looked down toward the German shepherd standing beside him. Shadow stared back with steady amber eyes glowing beneath the dim apartment light. Not frightened. Certain. As if somehow the dog had been waiting years to hear those words too. The hallway outside apartment 306 erupted with hurried movement. Shoes against concrete. Elevator doors sliding shut. Low voices trying not to become panic. Elias stood frozen for only half a second before Shadow nudged hard against his leg and pulled him toward the kitchen hallway. Instinct took over immediately. The old Marine inside him woke fully now. Fear became focus. Breathing slowed. Every sound sharpened. "Move," Samuel whispered urgently through the front door. "Now." Elias grabbed the cassette tape and shoved it into his jacket pocket while Shadow guided him forward through the dim apartment. The kitchen smelled faintly of old coffee and rain drifting through cracked window seals. Behind them, Another knock rattled the front door harder this time. Not patient anymore. Police, a voice called calmly. Open the door, Mr. Grayson. Shadow barked furiously. Elias felt the dog's body brush tightly against his knee as they reached the narrow service hallway beside the pantry. At the far end waited the old fire exit door leading toward the back stairwell. Elias remembered it from years earlier. Rusted hinges. For flights down to the alley. Shadow moved ahead first, nose twitching rapidly through the darkness. Then suddenly the dog stopped, completely rigid. Elias nearly collided into him. What is it? Shadow released a deep, warning growl toward the stairwell door. Elias listened carefully. At first there was nothing except rainwater dripping through distant pipes. Then came the sound. Slow footsteps climbing upward from below them inside the stairwell. Somebody else was already coming up. Elias felt coldness spread through his chest. They covered both exits. Samuel whispered faintly through the apartment behind them. The front door shook under another heavy knock. Open this door now. Shadow suddenly turned away from the stairwell and pulled hard back toward the apartment itself. Elias stumbled slightly. Shadow. But the dog kept moving, urgent now. Focused, not panicked. Elias trusted him instantly. They moved quickly through the dark apartment while voices outside the front entrance grew louder. The old floorboards creaked beneath Elias's boots. Shadow guided him straight past the couch, past the bedroom hallway, and directly toward the piano covered beneath the white dust sheet. Elias frowned. What are you doing? Shadow pawed aggressively at the floor beside the piano bench. Once, twice, then barked sharply. Elias dropped beside the piano and reached down across the hardwood floorboards. Dust coated his fingertips. Then suddenly he felt it. A thin metal handle hidden beneath the edge of the rug. His pulse jumped. No way. Shadow barked again toward the front door as the sound of keys rattling outside echoed through the apartment. Somebody was unlocking the entrance. Elias pulled hard on the hidden handle. A narrow floor compartment opened beneath the piano bench with a low creak. Cool air drifted upward from inside. Hidden beneath old insulation and wrapped carefully in plastic rested several thick file folders and a small digital recorder. Elias touched the recorder carefully, then froze. Because attached to it with tape was another note in Claire's handwriting. For Elias only. Shadow suddenly positioned himself directly in front of Elias again, facing the apartment hallway. Protective. Waiting. The front door opened somewhere behind them with a loud crack against the wall. Footsteps entered immediately. Calm. Controlled. Mr. Grayson, one man called out. We only want the files. Elias felt his heartbeat hammering violently now. But beside him, Shadow remained perfectly still. The dog was listening. Calculating. Then suddenly Shadow turned his head sharply toward the bedroom window. Elias heard it 1 second later. A faint tapping against the fire escape glass outside. Samuel's voice whispered urgently through the rain. The bedroom window. Hurry. Elias grabbed the recorder and files blindly while Shadow guided him fast through the dark apartment. Behind them, the strangers moved deeper into the living room now, opening drawers, searching quickly. One of them stopped near the piano. Silence followed, then a curse under his breath. They knew the compartment had been opened. Shadow pushed his nose hard against Elias's hand, steering him toward the bedroom. Rain blew cold through the cracked fire escape window, while thunder rolled once more above the city. Elias climbed carefully onto the narrow metal platform outside, gripping the soaked railing tightly with one hand while holding the files against his chest with the other. Shadow leaped beside him without hesitation. Below them, the alley stretched dark and empty beneath the storm. Then from somewhere inside the apartment came a voice filled with sudden panic. They found the recorder. Everything went silent after that. Even the rain seemed to stop for a moment. Because Elias finally understood something terrifying. Claire had never hidden those files from criminals. She had hidden them from the police. Rain hammered softly against the fire escape while Elias gripped the freezing metal railing with trembling hands. For stories below, the alley shimmered beneath pale streetlights and puddles of storm water. Shadow stayed pressed tightly against his side, steady and alert. The warmth of the German shepherd cutting through the cold night air like something alive in a world that suddenly no longer felt safe. Behind them, voices moved quickly inside the apartment. Drawers opening. Furniture shifting. One man cursed sharply near the piano while another voice spoke low and urgent. Find the recorder. Samuel crouched beside the bedroom window, rain dripping from his dark coat. Elias could hear exhaustion in the man's breathing. "We need to go," Samuel whispered. "Right now." Elias tightened his grip around the files hidden beneath his jacket. Claire knew all of this. Samuel lowered his eyes for a moment. "Your wife tried to expose officers taking evidence money from old narcotics cases. Daniel helped her at first. But when other people inside the department found out, his voice faded beneath the storm. Elias felt grief settle heavily into his chest all over again. Not sharp anymore. Worse. Quiet. The kind that hollowed a person slowly over time. Shadow suddenly turned his head toward the alley below and released a low warning growl. Elias immediately listened harder. Beneath the rain came the sound of tires rolling slowly across wet pavement. Another vehicle approaching. Samuel looked down over the railing and muttered softly beneath his breath. "They found us." The old fire escape groaned beneath their weight as Samuel guided Elias toward the stair ladder descending into the alley. Shadow moved first, carefully stepping down each slick metal rung while Elias followed slowly behind, one hand on the ladder and the other gripping the files against his chest. Blindness turned every step into trust now. Trust in the dog. Trust in instinct. Trust in the strange feeling that somehow Claire was still guiding him through the dark. Halfway down, Elias paused suddenly. His fingers brushed against something tucked inside the jacket pocket beside the cassette tape. The second note Claire had hidden with the recorder. Slowly, he pulled it free beneath the rain. Thick marker letters pressed deep enough for him to read by touch. "If you are reading this, Shadow chose you for a reason." Elias stopped breathing for a moment. Shadow looked back up toward him from the ladder below, amber eyes glowing beneath the weak alley light. Not violent, not broken, waiting. Elias felt tears sting his eyes for the first time in years. Claire had known about the dog somehow, knew he would come, knew he would lead Elias here. Below them, headlights suddenly swept across the alley entrance. Doors opened. Voices echoed faintly through the storm. Samuel hurried downward. "Move, Elias." But Elias remained frozen for one final second beneath the rain, one hand resting against Shadow's thick fur. For years after losing his sight, darkness had felt like punishment. Endless. Empty. But standing there on that rusted fire escape with cold rain soaking through his jacket and a retired police dog refusing to leave his side, Elias realized something that changed him forever. Sometimes God does not send answers the way people expect. Sometimes he sends them with four paws, old scars, and eyes that see through the dark better than any human ever could. Shadow nudged Elias gently forward again, guiding him down the final steps toward the alley below while thunder rolled softly over the sleeping city. And for the first time since Afghanistan took his sight, Elias Grayson no longer felt lost.